Welcome to today's USP and Pharmatech webinar, PCM and Quality. Upgrade your solution. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us. Next. Each registration is unique and grants the right for the individual registrant only to view this webinar. Sharing this webinar with unregistered viewers either during or after the performance violates Pharmatech Associates copyrights and is prohibited. Next. If you have not already done so, we ask that you take time to read the Pharmatech Associates course disclaimer. You can download this presentation, including the disclaimer, from your USP Education account. Please follow the instructions in your confirmation email to download the presentation. Next. We have three presenters today's webinar. Lawrence D. Belder, PCM Practice Lead at Pharmatech Associates, Dr. Gabriela Grasa Manino, PCM Programs Director, Advanced Manufacturing Technologist at USP, and Dr. Atul Dubey, Senior Principal Scientist, PCM at USP. Welcome and thank you to you all for presenting. I will now hand it over the presentation to Lawrence. Lawrence, you need to unmute.
So also from my side, welcome to this webinar about the quality aspects of continuous manufacturing for all solid dose drug product manufacturing. This is the third webinar in this series, and it's hosted by USP and Pharmatech Associates together. Now, my name is Lawrence de Belder, and I have built many years already of experience with the Janssen supply chain, where I was the lead for continuous manufacturing for many years. And now I'm leading the continuous manufacturing consulting team at Pharmatech Associates, which is a USP company since nearly 2 years now. And I have two guests today. One is Atul Dubey, who can speak with a lot of authority because he just finalized a guidance document, a publication that is about how to build a control strategy for continuous manufacturing. And also my second guest is Gabriela Manino, who is the director of advanced manufacturing at USP, and that includes continuous manufacturing. So also her input would be great. We asked Gabriela to ask questions while Atul and myself are going through the material. That's the plan. Now, but before we're going to talk about continuous manufacturing for oral solid dose, I first would like to explain a little bit how the standard process, the conventional process, works for oral solid dose processing. Now, it all starts with an operator manually weighing the excipients and the API on a scale and setting this aside. And then when the blending area is ready, then the material is manually dumped in a tumble blender, and that will rotate a number of times to mix all the materials which is in the blender. And then this blender is set aside. Samples are being taken by QA with a sample thief at certain locations to prove that the content of the blender is homogeneous. And this testing is done offline then in a lab with an HPLC and can take a number of days before the results are ready and the material can be released to go to the next step. Also, that goes together with a batch record that needs to be completed. Now, when the compression area is ready, the blend can be transported to an area above the compression machine and can be released into the hopper. The machine will make tablets with all of that material until the blender is completely empty. And the tablet samples then are being taken to check for hardness, thickness, weight, and other samples of the compression machine go then to the lab also for HPLC tests. After the next release, the tablets can go still to coating process. It's not always needed, but in some cases it is. And then after the coating, the final release tests will happen that release the product to go to the packaging area. Now, in some circumstances, it is possible that there's flow issues or segregation issues. And in that case, a dry granulation or roller compaction step is often added where the powder mix goes between two very big rolls, and those are pressing the powder together and create a ribbon that is formed, and this ribbon falls apart into flakes that can be milled to the correct particle size distribution. If the blend has compression issues as well, a wet instead of a dry granulation step could be done to create flowable granules with good compressing behavior, and after that it can go to the milling step again. Now, like that, well flowable granules are being shaped and formed, and this should give good compressing behavior. Now, between all these steps, there's many days of testing needed. There's a lot of work to move the material around and handle the batch records. There's space needed for the storage of all the materials. There's a lot of handling and transportation going on. So the cycle time of a complete batch process is very long to make solids, and it can be very cumbersome and expensive as a process as well. Now, just imagine that if you could combine all these machines together into one large equipment train, you connect all these unit operations, you would be able to feed in all the material on one side of the line, and you would take out all the finished products on the other side of the line in one go. So you would not have intermediate storage. You would not have to test in between all the time. You would not have all those batch records. You only have one batch record at the end of the process. And your batch size would then be defined not by the size of the equipment, but by the duration of the run. And that would be very beneficial. It would mean that you could define yourself how long you can run. You can make very large batches, very short batches, and it would all use the same parameter settings, which means that if you scale from your development into your commercial manufacturing, you would not have to change any parameters, so that the scaling or the tech transfer from development to your commercial manufacturing can be done very, very easily. Also, during development, instead of having to make a new batch with each set of parameters that you want to test during your design of experiments, you just have to run very shortly. You can switch over to your next set just on the fly, and like that can do very fast and easy design of experiment sets with a very limited amount of material. The equipment can be a lot smaller as well and more energy efficient. And because of all the inline measurements that are needed to be able to do this, also our process knowledge would be tremendous and immediate, so that we could also separate small fractions of out-of-spec material if a deviation would occur, instead of having to throw away complete batches if you discover issues at the end of the line.
Yeah, thank you, Lawrence, for describing all these benefits. So you mentioned that CM helps for cost, for process understanding. It helps with flexibility in development and tech transfer and manufacturing. So my question is, where do you think the biggest financial benefits could be found for CM?
Well, I think that overall the faster speed to market is probably the biggest one, because if you are able to develop faster, to have tech transfer faster, you have shorter cycle times. You would be able to get faster to the market, and because of that, you have a lot more sales, because you only have a limited amount of time on the market with your own patent. So you would be able to maybe save half a year or longer that you can still have that patent, and that would bring a lot of potential benefit. Second is the tech transfer cost that is significantly reduced or completely gone. And also the commercial manufacturing cost can be reduced significantly if you, especially if you include the cost of bad quality in your calculations. Those are the three biggest ones, I think.
That sounds wonderful. So in oral solid dosage, we have really seen that the facility size can be reduced significantly. And what you said, Lawrence, about faster time to market, I think that's also relevant for generics because of the exclusivity period. And if you're able to go to market sooner, that has significant economic implications. When we look at the real differences between CM and batch, we already saw that in batch we have this individual unit operations and equipment, and you move your entire material one at a time through those unit operations. And we also saw a continuous line wherein the material flows from one end into the other. So definitely there is a sense of continuity in the material movement. But if we go by official definition, which the regulatory agencies have harmonized, continuous manufacturing process only needs to have a minimum of 2 unit operations which are connected together and material is flowing between them. So that means that a lot of the semi-continuous or so-called semi-continuous processes can also be considered as a continuous manufacturing operations when you have multiple unit operations which are still being operated in batch. And I think that is very valuable because there's a lot of batch equipment which people have a lot of experience with, and it's well suited for their processes and materials. So why not use that? When we look at a continuous manufacturing line, when material is flowing from one unit operation to another, and when we look back at the batch blender that Lawrence showed earlier, in a batch blender, you have your material all in one blender and it's being processed, and then analytical tests are done. And if the tests are okay, then you move on to your next step. So you take care of any variability that may have occurred during that unit operation, during that blending. There is no possibility of that variability moving downstream. But in continuous, there is. There is a possibility that if we fail to detect or take care of variability in a unit operation, it can pass down to the downstream unit operation. So that is a concern. And there are methods available to take care of that. And we will see some of them later in this webinar. Also, there is this concept of homogeneity in time versus in space. So when we talk about batch manufacturing, we have this one confined space of, say, a blender, wherein we homogenize the material. We wait till we are able to complete the blending process and everything is homogeneous in this particular space. In continuous, we look at homogeneity over time. That means that if I look at 5 minutes and then if I look at 8 minutes at the same location, I want to have the material, the process in the same state. So that also tells me that the propagation of disturbances should not be there in time. So it is essential to capture these material variability and process variability during the continuous flow process. This will also help with material traceability, which is again a very critical question, which is often asked as to how do you track what material was being used when a given tablet was being manufactured during continuous manufacturing. So there are methods available for that, and we will describe modeling tools later in, which also help trace the material throughout the process. So essentially the key is that we want to make sure we have the process designed well, we have the software we understand, we have the traceability in place, and then we are able to mitigate the risks of perturbation of these disturbances downstream. And we'll see how PAT and other systems help in the process. And when we look at the potential sources of variation, this could be a longer list, and this is a subset of that. And it's very interesting because some of these sources of variations we do not have to worry about in a big batch equipment. So you have incoming material feed, and you may have, say, excipient batches coming from different vendors, or even different batches or lots of the same excipient. There can be minor variations in bulk density or particle size distribution. So to mitigate this, actually, I heard one of the companies, they mix 5 incoming lots together and they homogenize it, and then they feed it into their feeders. So that's an interesting approach that they apply. but it depends on your material, what kind of approach you want to take. Then there can be some special causes for that variation. For example, electrostatics behavior is critical in powder flow. If the powder is very electrostatic, it makes it difficult for it to flow, and we'll see some of the effects later on. Also, humidity. In powders, it's very interesting. Powders can behave like solids, they can behave like fluids, they can flow, and they can also behave like gases, as in they can fluidize. And humidity has tremendous impact on that. So sometimes we need to maintain a certain level of humidity in the environment. I always think back to the salt shaker. When I was a kid, I used to have trouble shaking out salt out of my salt shaker during rainy days because it would just become so humid it would not flow out. So it makes a world of difference in the flow behavior. Feeders are extremely sensitive to vibrations. So when we design a continuous manufacturing line, I've seen sometimes these lines are designed such that you have metallic platforms and stairs built along it. But one has to be careful with the design there. That when people are going up and down the stairs, there are vibrations and they can creep into the feeders. The feeders also have very sensitive scales built into them, and that's why they're called the loss and weight feeders. The scales measure the loss of the weight in the material, and they feed accordingly. They all have software which they use to measure this and to raise any alarms in case there is a variability. So sometimes the software from different vendors, it has trouble talking to each other. Sometimes the software has its own challenges to work with, and that can lead to some variability. When you refill a feeder, typically it can create a spike because the feeder works on the amount of weight of material that is there in the feeder. So when you refill a feeder, the weight suddenly increases, and that can impact the behavior of the feeder. So feeders tend to go into a different mode of operation while the refill is happening, and you have to be careful about what kind of material is being fed and how you deal with the refill. And all of this information can go into your control strategy. And there are several other sources of variability, such as fouling of the filters and augers and sensors, sensor shifting, and error accumulation across the line.
Yes, Atul. So there's so many potential sources of variation, and I see here that some of them are intrinsic. So my question is, how can we know if these variations will impact the final quality of the product?
So we have to characterize. So we characterize the material at different locations during the manufacturing process. We have a process analytical technology, or PAT equipment, that is mounted. Sometimes you may have a PAT probe right at the feed frame of the tablet press, right towards the end of your process, and that could help you understand what kind of content uniformity you're getting. So all of these sensors, and then that people are also able to generate models for these processes with experience, and soft sensors can be developed with all of these inputs, and all of these can go together, and there is a little bit of end product testing also that can be done at line on the tablets. And I think all of this combined creates a solid body of knowledge which can really help us understand the risk.
Now, hearing Atul talk about the variation of a system, it becomes clear that feeding is the most important source of variation in the continuous manufacturing process, as it is the start of everything. But feeding is never perfect, and variation will always occur because you work with augers, because the variation of materials, because feeders are moving and vibrating on top of very sensitive waste cells, and because feeder hoppers need to be refilled regularly, so the waste cells need to stop working until the system is stable again. And so the measuring frequency and the averaging of the data of that information that comes from the feeder by the waste cells and by the software, it becomes very, very important, because if the averaging or the frequency is too long or too late, then the real fluctuations can be missed completely, and it can give a completely false idea of that you would think that it's constantly dosing, but in reality it is not. Now, an overshoot of API of a feeder could end up in a tablet a few minutes later and potentially can damage the health of a patient. And so something needs to be done to mix all the ingredients and to minimize the impact of all this variation. All the time, and in every continuous manufacturing application, an inline blender is installed. Now, more mixing of that blender means blending out variation better, but it also spreads out more. So it will take longer to wash variations out. That's also not always ideal. So to find an optimum, the mixing capability of the blender for every formulation needs to be well understood. And for which, how we do that, we call in life a concept that is called residence time distribution, or otherwise called RTD. Now, RTD is a probability function, a distribution function of the time that particles need to move through a section of the line. And that describes, so it describes how a particle behaves inside the reactor. And first that is defined theoretically, and then it will be tested with experiments that then prove that the theoretical curve corresponds to reality. And that's how it's done. And for this, a tracer material can be added to the system, like you see on this picture. On the top, on the entrance of the blender, you add a tracer, and at the exit of the blender, there can be a sensor that detects then when the tracer exits your system, how long does it take, how is the concentration of this tracer evolving, and like that you have a good understanding how your blender has mixed well, and when you see by which time that this tracer is washed out completely, like that you know that all your mixing has been done properly and your tracer is completely gone. Now, after defining the RTD like this for an individual unit operation.
Lawrence, before you move forward, I do have a question.
Yes, Gabriela?
Related to the tracer. What would happen if you do not use a good tracer?
Yeah,
That's the previous slide.
It's a good question. If you have the wrong tracer, for instance, with a particle size distribution that differs strongly from the blend that you are using, you might have different testing with your PAT tool than what you would have without the tracer, which means that the tracer influences your blend, and your RTD curve, your RTD model that you create, would give you wrong predictions. So in the future, you would think that you're doing well, but potentially can do wrong. It will not be a very big impact, but it will add to the inaccuracy of your system. So it's something strongly to avoid. To be able to avoid this, in some cases, companies, instead of using a tracer, which is different material, they use an increased amount of API, or a decreased amount of API, which is a step change in your materials. And that could be an alternative method. Now, once that you've done the RTD calculation for a blender, you can also do that for your compression machine, for other blenders, for other parts of your line, even a tube where material passes through. And then you're gonna bring all of those RTD models together into a full line RTD. And this will give you an understanding of how variation or disturbances propagate through the line from the beginning of the line all the way to the end. And all of this will give you a lot of information. It can help you detect a disturbance and know exactly when you need to open up your reject valve a bit further down the line. It can also help you if you find an out of specification at the end of the line, to trace that back all the way to your individual sublots of excipients or API that you used in the beginning of your process. And it can help you to identify what needs to be the sampling frequency, or the measuring speed with which you have other sensors in your line to assure that you can capture all the variation of your process.
So what can go wrong in a typical CM train when we look at just the feeding unit operation? And these are some good pictures that really demonstrate what can go wrong. So there are powder flow issues, as we all know. In a feeder, typically we have a screw auger that is conveying the material out of a hopper. And if the material is too sticky and it sticks to either the auger or the walls of the feeder, it can create challenges. So you could have clogging, you could have obstruction to the flow. The properties of the material, such as cohesive properties or electrostatics, particle size distribution and surface energy are measurements or properties that impact electrostatic or cohesive properties. And so these could create these phenomena that you see here, such as bearding of the material, that it creates a beard-like thing. I call it the Santa Claus beard out of the feeder outlet, or it can create these holes like rat holes where the material is sticking around and you really have an empty space in between and nothing is flowing out. You could have material that may coat. So what you see here is a top-down view into the feeder vessel where there is an agitator, and that agitator is supposed to make the material flowable so that the screw auger, which is down below, if you look at the second picture of the API 2, you will see, you can see the screw auger down there and there's no powder going to it. So the screw is confused that I'm getting no powder and there's still powder sitting inside the hopper up there. So those are the challenges that can happen when the particles actually coat the geometry or stick to each other, or they just are too difficult to flow. Material can agglomerate and so. So this is why proper characterization of material properties is so critical, and material characterization is an important element of control strategy for any process. So knowing our material is extremely important because these flow issues can really make or break a continuous manufacturing process. So how do we solve these? And I tell you that there are solutions available for each of these flow issues. So we have to basically fundamentally understand our material that we are using and the equipment that we're using, the interplay between that material and the equipment. So we have many solutions. So you already saw some agitators in feeders that are there to make a material flow. And I tell you a funny story. I have seen a hammer oftentimes used in some companies and jokingly called the GMP hammer. And that hammer is used to hammer down on the vessel to make the material flow or powder fall. But we have to be careful about all of these solutions if they are introducing any variability due to vibrations. So we have other devices like outlet screens, agitators, impactors, and vibration units, special types of hoppers. And then you can also make a few changes to the material itself to make it flow better. You could deionize it, you could have special coatings on it, and so on. Once you have that level of control on your material side and you have your devices at hand, you could also work with your process and make sure that the material is flowing the way you require it to. As in, you have the required feed rate, you have the required flow rate through the process or not. If not, then you may have to increase certain speeds of maybe some kind of agitators or impellers. And so those controls are always there. And then you could increase your throughput or lower it depending on the need of your process. You could in material changes, one of the things that you can do is pre-blending it with silicon dioxide also. Of course, depending on your formulation allowing it or not. You could change certain particle morphologies so that you have less needle-shaped particles, because needle-shaped particles tend to flow poorly. The more closer to a sphere you are, the better it is to make them flow. And finally, sometimes we've seen that companies pre-blend APIs with excipients in the batch mode. So that's where, again, you have a batch helping out with a continuous manufacturing process, and it is totally fine to have that.
Now, one specific type of issue that influences material flow is electric charging, and that's specific because it can change over time, and it's dependent of a lot of other factors as well. And but the effects, they are well known since a very long time. Even 50 years ago, a scientist who is called Gibson, he published an article that showed under which conditions there is less or more charge buildup in a dynamic powder environment. And that table that you see on the screen now shows, for instance, that there's a lot more charging that happens when there's pneumatical conveying of the particles, because those particles typically they rub more against each other than to the wall of the equipment, and that is what gives the most charge, or more charge, according to Gibson. And that's surprising, because you would think that that milling would be a lot more impactful at first sight than pneumatic conveying, but according to his calculations and experiments, that was not the case. Now, overall, with everything that's said about variability, we can conclude that you create a robust process if you're able to have full reliability under different conditions with different disturbances, and your capability to handle variation is what drives your robustness in a continuous manufacturing process. And it's the ability basically to achieve acceptable limits. And in reality, that often is measured with things which are called process capability, CPK, or process performance, PPK.
So to ensure our quality, we need to have a control strategy, and we need to demonstrate that we have a solid control strategy. What goes into the control strategy? And as we can see intuitively, I already mentioned that you need to understand your materials, and that goes into your control strategy. We also need to understand our equipment, what kind of equipment design we have. There are several types of feeders available. There are different types of continuous blenders available, and they have different blade designs, etc. So we need to understand that, and then what kind of impact those blades would have on the material, uh, how shear sensitive our material is, and all of that matters, and it has implications on the product quality, and all of that also goes into the assessment of the risk that you have when you carry out these operations. So we need to understand, say, what is the range of my impeller speeds that I can work within. And when I look at each equipment and each unit operation, and I try to understand the range within which I can operate, I tend to create what I call as a parametric control, or the design space. So you have your parameters for every unit operation. Sometimes they are, because this is a connected process, those parameters affect each other. So when these parameters affect each other, instead of having a range for each parameter, it is better to have a design space within which we know that our process is going to behave the way we want it to behave. So sometimes we use a lot of process models to help with that also. Process analytical technologies, like I mentioned, they help us see what's going on in the process in real time in many cases. And they are also used, the readings from those are also used to improve the process models sometimes. And we also need to demonstrate what happens when we are starting up the process. when you really don't have what we call as a state of control, and while you are winding down a particular run or shutting down the process. So when you're starting up, your feeders are being filled, and your entire process line does not have all the material um, as it would have when it is running at in a state of control. So what happens to the product that is being formed at that time, that needs to be demonstrated. And the same thing during the shutdown. So these are transient events, and it needs to be logged how these are handled. And that goes into the control strategy. And how we sample across the process line, how often we sample, and what do we do with that data. All of that information goes into the control strategy.
So, Atul, this is very interesting because you talked about the different elements that go into the control strategy. Can you speak towards the whether control strategies can be generally applicable or they are product specific?
It's both ways. Some aspects of control strategies are always there. For example, material characterization. You're always wanna characterize your materials. And equipment, if you have a change in equipment, your control strategy is going to change accordingly. And then your process for your specific product. One product may use direct compression. Another product may use wet granulation. So with wet granulation, the considerations for that unit operations will also come. So what we call as the critical process parameters, or CPPs, they are different because we have a granulation step in there. So it will vary depending on what you're making and how you're making it. So we see a very nice picture of a continuous manufacturing setup, and you can see that it is multi-level. This is a 3-level design, and it's very compact. Um, and so, and if you remember earlier on, I mentioned that I have seen some setups where everything is mounted on metallic platforms. So when you walk on them, there is vibrations, and there are stairs to go up and down. So it's important to engineer out these sources of variations. So when you are designing this facility, you want to make sure that variations due to people walking or anything falling down on the floor, etc., those vibrations are well understood. And then equipment dimensioning, depending on the kind of feed rate ranges we want to work with, whether we want to create at 25 kilos an hour or we want to create at 110 kilos an hour. So we need to make sure that our equipment is appropriately dimensioned. And there may be certain unit operations which may be in batch mode. So for example, drying, often it is done in batch. So we need to make sure that we dimension our dryers accordingly, depending on the load. Mixing capabilities, extremely important, because feeding and mixing basically could make or break the entire operation here. So we need to make sure that we have the right mixer, etc. And I think I spoke to that earlier also. We need to make sure the material is not just sitting there somewhere in dead zones and we don't know about it. We are not dropping material through heights in a way that it is able to segregate, because that mitigates a significant advantage of continuous manufacturing, where we don't have to worry about segregation so much. Sometimes you have to hold up material in between unit operations in what we call as intermediate bulk containers, or IBCs. So all of that should be noted, and we need to see what happens to the material when it is held up. And like I said earlier, startup, shutdown, all of this are the elements that we need to really be careful about. And there is documentation available how to handle all of these. So essentially, we want to have a repetitive process where we can assure the quality. And cleaning is another significant area which needs to be optimized, because when you're making a lot of material or different products into the same line, you need to make sure that you validate your cleaning, and the time it takes to clean is extremely important from a business perspective.
Quality by design starts with understanding the risks and then mitigating them. In continuous manufacturing processes, we start just like that. We first do a risk assessment, and we do criticality analysis. This gives us an overview of what will be the overall design criteria. Then we build a control strategy, and then in the next stage, we do a confirmation. The settings are frozen, validated in a PPQ phase, and then once that we run commercially, it is possible to use CPV or continued process verification to assure with trending data, etc., that the process remains under control over time. Now, after the initial mitigations, there will be a number of iterations. So we need to do that risk assessment a number of times until all the high and medium risks are being solved. And only by then we have really finalized the critical process parameters and critical material attributes, because until we have mitigated all the risks, they still might need to be changed. So that's how you do it. And the lower your risks, basically, the higher the reliability of your process. Now, the CPPs can be set as a range, as Atul said earlier, or they can be set as a design space. Now, what is the difference? In the conventional way, you defined 2 values for every CPP, and in between there the process needed to stay. And that's parametric setup, and that's only 2 values in between where it has to stay, and those values are always fixed. Now, in case of parameters that are independent with other parameters, those 2 values, they might change. They might become larger certain moments, which gives you an opportunity to run your process on a different or on additional points. But in reality, for parametric approach, there you keep it at the worst case, so you do not take advantage of that opportunity.
So, Lawrence, can you elaborate a little bit more? What's the advantage of working with the design space?
Now, if you look at the little drawings at the bottom, if you would work with parametric control, you would stay within the little squares that are on these graphs. That would be your operating space. Your CPP1 and CPP2, they both need to stay within those values. But if you make them interdependent, you can create a design space which is more set by algebraic equations and gives you a completely different shape. So you see that that the elliptic forms or the different shapes give you more area where you can maneuver in, and in reality that means that you have more area where you can maneuver in for the same amount of variation, which gives you a better yield basically for your process.
So like I said earlier, material characterization is critical for the process to succeed. I think we lost there we go. So the goal here is, again, to make sure that we qualify the properties and their effect on the process and product performance. So essentially, what are we trying to characterize here? So I'll just be brief about it. We're dealing with powders. So essentially, we want to look at the bulk density. And sometimes it can be looked at in 2 ways. One is your tap density, wherein you tap the material and see what it is. And otherwise, it's just the normal density. And particle size distribution has tremendous impact on flow properties potentially. So it is important to understand what particle size distribution we have in each of the components. We know that the particle morphology, like I mentioned earlier, we want to eliminate your needle-shaped particles as much as possible to make sure that they flow well. So morphology is also important. And there are also tools available to measure things like electrostatics behavior. And in fact, USP is coming up with a new general chapter soon on electrostatics and also on wettability, because in wet granulation processes, wettability is important. And then compressibility using compaction simulator. That's another new general chapter USP is coming up with. So it's important that your material is compressible to the degree that you want it to, and there are no undue behaviors once it is compressed. So there are tools available to characterize all of these parameters. And then once you have all of this data coming out from your analytical tools, you can really perform data analysis and link the material behavior, material attributes to your process performance. Then we come to the equipment characterization. There are processes or tools available to characterize each unit operation in detail. So we can characterize feeders, how they are working, and we can characterize your blenders. The lubrication, at what point do we add the lubricant is critical sometimes, because if you over lubricate your blend by adding lubricant too early, that can have a dissolution impact. It can impact the dissolution and bioavailability of your product. So and of course, during wet or dry granulation, we need to look at how the equipment is impacting the properties of the granules. So intermediate materials such as the granules, it's important to make sure that we have the critical process and critical material properties down there. Compression also, like I said, there are simulators available for compression that tell us how the material will respond to the punches hitting it from top and the bottom. What's going to happen to the particles within it? Is there going to be any capping or any kinds of challenges? And when the tablets come out, are they friable or are they good? Are they going to they need a relaxation time or not? So all of those things are characterized along with this equipment. And then finally, the coating, how much weight gain the tablets have due to the coating. Is there variability intra-tablet or inter-tablet or inter-batch? All of those can be characterized, and there are well researched papers available for that.
So once that you did the material characterization, you start first with your risk assessment, then you do your material characterization, equipment characterization, you have your RTD models defined. Then you are going to bring all those RTD models together with the CPPs, which are in the meantime clear and fixed. You have your design spaces defined. You bring all of those aspects together, and you create like that a full process model, they call it, which informs then how the line needs to react and respond depending on what happens with the product or with your process. Does a diversion valve need to go open? Is a part of the batch need to be rejected? Will the line stop? Does it just give an alarm? Your process model will also inform how it needs to perform the startup and shutdown activities. And overall, we call that orchestration of your line. So that's what process modeling does.
And we talked about PAT earlier. That why do we need to use PAT? We need to use PAT so that we understand what's going on within our process. So the aim here is to understand your variations in the material properties early on, and then what's happening to the material as it is being transformed during our process. So we have various probes in different unit operations that are measuring things like particle size, pressure, temperature, and like I mentioned earlier, probes in feed frames look at content uniformity right before compression. And then there are also probes that can be there in the outlet of the blender, for example, earlier as Lawrence showed. So it is there to capture any variability or special cause variation that may happen because of an event which we did not anticipate. And it can also help us understand the natural variability that can happen when we change, say, incoming lots of materials. So this could feed, like I said earlier, all of this data could feed into a process model or a machine learning model in the future. And that could essentially help us achieve real-time release by showing that we have control over the process at every step because of this data. There are several technologies available or tools available for PAT. We will not go step by step through this line. We don't have that much time today, but you can see here that there are tools available from the early stages of the process when you are identifying your incoming material to your finished product when your film coated product is available. So you'll see a lot of near infrared and Raman spectroscopic tools being used across the entire process. Each have their advantages and challenges associated with them. So it's essential to understand the capabilities and limitations of your tools for PAT as well.
So Atul, I do have a question here about the PET equipment because you're showing that it's being used in different stages of the process of the life cycle. So how can PET equipment further mature for the purpose of continuous manufacturing applications?
So uh, the way I see it, the role of PAT equipment is to see and tell the operator what's going on within it. But sometimes that operator does not have to be human. It could be a soft sensor. It could be some kind of a model. So the PAT probes, what you look at these is that you want to make sure that what they're able to sense and convey is the correct information. Sometimes because of repeated use or elongated usage, you could have sensor fouling or sensor shifting. Those are challenges well known, wherein that with time you may not get the correct information. You need to take it out and clean it up and etc. So the future state would be that the software would be able to sense these things and alarm the operator. Also the speed and the number of samples that you can take. Sometimes it is very important to have those elements in there. And I think eventually the idea is to have minimal invasion into the process and get the maximum amount of data that can lead to real-time quality assurance. So the PAT technologies should try to achieve that. So when we look at the overall structure of the PAT controls and automation, in many plants you have the MES or the manufacturing execution system as the overall software that software system basically. And then you have this data acquisition system, often known as the supervisory control, the SCADA system. The PAT management system can actually work in tandem with this SCADA system. All of this is controlled with your MES, which is basically controlling how much you're producing and when you're producing. And then you have at every unit operation, starting from the right, where you have the loss and weight dosing to the coating, you have these controls which work with your existing systems. And you can essentially feed data into back and forth from these PAT sensors into the models. And there are certain process parameters you have to worry about. For example, in blending, you would look at the impeller speed, etc. So all of those eventually, like I said, feed into an more intelligent way of running your process. Real-time release is essentially a goal, but I may also mention that it is not a necessity to file real-time release. Many companies choose not to do that, but it is achievable if we have material understanding, process understanding, the right process models, the right PAT, and everything feeding into an intelligent way of doing things. There are several CQAs that are listed here, and there are RTR methods associated with them. And then there are the traditional methods like the UHPLC, which would back up your real-time release sensors. Lawrence, do you want to elaborate a little bit more on that, or we don't have time?
Yeah, I think we have to conclude in the meantime, Atul. Thank you very much. So as a conclusion, I think that we may very well say that continuous manufacturing can really assure high quality in your manufacturing processes. The resolution with which you can look at the process using PAT, you can compare that with looking at the stars with a telescope instead of with binoculars or with a naked eye in conventional systems. So you can adjust your processes on the fly as well while you operate all the time, keep it in the sweet spot. And experience also shows that continuous blending gives more homogeneous results than, and also twin screw granulation gives narrower particle size distribution compared with conventional systems. You can develop using QBD processes, making the things more robust, and you can understand your processes a lot better with all the data that you generate. Scaling becomes easier with lower risk, and manufacturing can happen with immediate measurement of your quality instead of measuring your quality afterwards and having potentially to reject the full batch. Summarized, with continuous manufacturing, you can upgrade your resolution and get to the next level of quality. I think that's overall the presentation for today. Now I think we can go into the questions.
Thank you, Lawrence and Dr. Atul and Dr. Gabriela.
So I see the first question on the screen here. This would imply that all the software must be validated. Well, it depends a little bit. So software needs to be validated at the end of the run, but you could already start building up your body of knowledge in the beginning of your development and generate informative data and information that you can use in your development. And at that stage, it does not need to be validated yet. You need to make sure that your validation is happening at the important stages of your process. So further down the road. At the end, it all needs to be validated indeed. The approach to determine the sampling frequency is what we explained there. So you with your RTD model or with your process model, you identify what will be your the size, the duration and the size of your peaks, and with those you will identify together with your blending capability of your line, you will identify what might be leftover potential variations that you cannot capture or blend out with your blending capability. Those you need to capture. Your RTD informs you how wide they can be and how high they can be, these variations. And your sampling frequency needs to be frequent enough to assure that you capture those variations. Because if you sample less frequent than that, those variations might still impact your quality and might slip through your safety net. Does PAT apply to the twin screw extruder with limited measurement probes? So the PAT typically is used as well with twin screw after the drying stage, measurement of the particle size distribution on one end and of the humidity on the other end. And so typically that's only done when it's dried already, because measuring with wet granules is a lot more difficult than with dry granules. FDA is accepting real-time release for commercial release. There's a few examples out there. So the first product of Vertex is full real-time release, and also Presista of Janssen, which is a batch to continuous conversion that initially was accepted with real-time release only for assay and ID, and afterwards also including for dissolution. So the full package of real-time release aspects were accepted there. So yes, FDA is accepting real-time release for commercial purposes as well. When we execute a PPQ on a CM line, do we need to demonstrate all portions of the design space are capable? With a PPQ, you do not need to prove your boundaries. You need to run at your process settings. You need to prove your design space earlier down the road in earlier stages of your development.